Hello everyone and welcome to the Housing and Landlord Action Coronavirus Guide to Landlords. It's a bit of a crazy time, but we're really pleased to have Paul Champlina from Landlord Action with us, who will hopefully be able to give us a bit of information on how to cope with this really tricky time for landlords. It's a strange one, I know, but Paul has got a huge amount of information that he'll be able to share, I understand, and hopefully shed some light on what's going on. So if I can hand over to Paul, just to talk us through his history and how he can help with today's information. So over to Paul.
Yep, thank you, Polly. Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Champlina. I've been helping landlords for over 25 years. I set up Landlord Action something like 20 years ago. My background was legal. I've worked in the last two recessions. We are now in a third recession. Officially, we're not in recession yet, but we are going to be in recession. There's no two ways about this. We are in totally unprecedented times. Landlords, tenants, every industry is affected by this COVID-19 crisis. I am doing more webinars now than I've had hot dinners in the last couple of weeks, believe you me. It is about engagement. It's about you protecting your investment. And the one bit of advice I'm going to say to you is you've got to work with your tenants more than ever now. Sustaining your tenancy, making sure you don't have a void period is imperative. I'm really busy. Just to let you know, obviously some of you might know me from the TV program Nightmare Tenants Slum Landlords. We have a new series coming out in June, which was all filmed pre-COVID-19. And I am brand ambassador for Hamilton Fraser, who bought Landlord Action 3 years ago. So not only am I brand ambassador and a director of Landlord Action, Hamilton Fraser, but we also own brands, well-known brands in the private rental sector, such as My Deposits, the Property Redress Scheme, which is the redress scheme for letting agents, where we've just literally launched a new mediation service for landlords. Tenants aren't paying the rent. We own Client Money Protect. Total Landlord Insurance, which is our core landlord insurance product. We've just launched a product called OME, which is a tenant replacement scheme, deposit scheme, where it's paid monthly by the tenant, where we insure the deposit. And we have other initiatives like HF Assist, which is the letting agent advice line, and also we have HF Academy, where we train letting agents. And as well as another product that I run and oversee is the very well-known website for landlords called Landlord Zone, where we have 250,000 landlords a month go on there, and it's all breaking news. We have a new editor called Nigel Lewis. So if you want to know what's going on a daily basis in the buy-to-let world, go on to Landlord Zone. We do a free guide, and we also have a referencing company called Tenant Verify. So literally, Polly, we are a one-stop shop for landlords now, a service provider.
There's plenty changing as well, isn't there, on a daily basis? It seems like there's something coming out every day that's affecting, well, not only landlords, but obviously the nation as a whole. So I dare say landlords are pretty busy at the moment trying to keep up with everything.
We are pretty busy. I mean, I will make some predictions of what's going to happen, further into this webinar. I think rents will come down. Obviously, I think property prices will come down. I think that's inevitable. With unemployment will rise. If the furloughing hadn't have come in so quickly, God knows what would have happened. Landlords and tenants are being affected. We have landlords that are losing their jobs. 90% of landlords, and maybe a lot of your customers, have got only 1 and 2 properties. We don't know. We are in the unknown. But I actually predict, and I think the commercial housing market will be affected a lot worse than the residential. You'll see a lot of businesses that won't be able to return, get back on the high street. I think the way that we work will be completely different post COVID-19, and you will see a lot of people working from home, a lot of people giving up and walking away from leases. So it is changing daily, but of course, most importantly, is health is wealth. It's about being healthy. And how we go about our daily life will completely change after the lockdown, and we all are pulling our hair out and hoping lockdown will finish soon.
One of the things we should say is that we're obviously recording this webinar very socially distanced. I'm recording from
Very
Sussex,
social.
and Paul, you're in
I'm in North
whereabouts?
London in Barnet.
North London. We're
Yeah, I'm in
definitely further than 2 meters away. So everything is
Yes,
being
we
done.
are. We'd have to go on the M25.
Yeah, I think we're very socially distanced on this one. So there's we're sticking to all the guidelines. Just to go over what we're going to be discussing today, we've tried to cover off everything that we hope is sort of the burning questions in people's minds. There should be a slide up now with today's discussion points on. We've obviously here at Howay, we've had a huge amount of questions coming in from our landlords, and I'm sure, Paul, you've had the same. So there's obviously the how to keep safe, maintaining your relationships with tenants, which I think is a really important one. The financial impact, complying with lettings legislations, managing your maintenance from a distance, as it were. There's been big changes to the eviction process, which, Paul, you're perfectly placed, I'm sure, to discuss with us. How to manage moves. Paul, we're going to put you on the spot with your predictions for the future, and then we've got some questions from you guys at home that we're gonna aim to answer. So if we can jump straight in with one of the most important, how to keep safe. So, Paul, if we can start with this one, obviously. We've got the main government advice, of course, that we're now very familiar with.
Yes, of course. I mean, everyone knows, about the essential journeys and keeping your distance, washing your hands. I mean, obviously, we're told that non-stop, and we know that. The realisation, Polly, is landlords are still running a business, and obviously, a lot of your landlords that use Howay and your other brands are self-managed landlords, so they are still managing or trying to manage their properties. Okay, so I speak to landlords on a daily basis, as you can imagine, for all our brands and also through Landlord Zone. Obviously, maintaining that business, maintaining cash flow, the communications, but of course, the view from the government is an essential journey. So, is an essential journey with regard to a check-in or a move-out? Well, technically not, and we will touch on that further down the line. But obviously, gaining access is going to be an issue as well. But you have to bear in mind that with regard to property move-ins and with regard to managing your property and obviously having to do it remotely, and bearing in mind, letting agents now are running from home. They're not running from their offices, and they're having to juggle. Technology is absolutely paramount, i.e. I'm doing more webinars than ever, obviously through technology and engagement, and of course with regard to how you can get into properties and what you can use with regard to apps. We're touching a bit more when we talk about essential repairs and obviously inspections further down the line. But yeah, actually the police don't have enforcement measures, believe it or not, with regard to move-ins on tenancies and stuff like that. I read that up. There's not a lot of guidance as well with regard to HMOs, believe it or not, and I think we're going to touch on that.
I was going to ask if HMO landlords need to take any additional action. I mean, do HMO landlords have any responsibility for their tenants?
Well, yeah, of course. Everyone that's a landlord has a responsibility for their tenant. Of course they do. There's a contract in place, and every tenant should live in a safe property, okay, and have quiet enjoyment relating to that. You need to find out from your tenants if any of the tenants are in self-isolation, okay, especially if they're in HMOs, okay. Have they shown signs of symptoms? Is there communication with the other tenants? Are the other tenants helping that person that's in self-isolation? Because if they are in self-isolation, they should be in their room, and obviously they should have access to their own bathroom if there is an HMO. So really working with your tenants, especially in HMOs. I mean, I've seen during this crisis, during lock-in, I've seen HMO landlords, Polly, and student landlords being hit the hardest with regard to tenants not paying their rent and actually moving out and vacating. So
a lot of student landlords are going home, aren't they?
They are going home. So what's happening is the universities are shut. they've just gone back to the family home, given the keys back. But bearing in mind, you know, the students are liable for the rent. They will have guarantors. I know one student landlord who's the biggest student landlord in Birmingham, and he told me he's worried about, he's got 300 tenants signing new tenancies on the 1st of July, and he's really, really worried. I mean, his default rate is about 25% at the moment. Really, really worried. So student landlords have been affected big time because of COVID virus.
I mean, it must be difficult in this instance to know, with very little guidance being offered with regards to what's happening with sort of the educational field. Are universities planning on going back? I mean, it must be difficult from both the landlord and the tenant point of view, because as a student, if you're not going to be going into university in September, which is potentially unlikely at this stage of the game, I suppose, what do you do with that tenancy agreement? Do you sign it? Do you, what are you to do? And as a landlord, I suppose you're in a bit of a stalemate. You can't force someone to sign an agreement.
You're in a massive stalemate.
Yeah.
But you know what you need to, Polly? I mean, landlords now have to think on their feet, be versatile, be streetwise. All right. So if you're in the student market, let's be very clear. With regard to lock-in, there hasn't been a lot of activity, but I speak to letting agents and they're still getting loads of inquiries. But bearing in mind, you know, general tenants, their work situation will change. You'll see tenants that are obviously falling into arrears, and we'll touch on that later on, that might end up being stuck in property because they can't move, because they've lost their job and they can't pass the referencing. But with regard to HMO landlords and student landlords, you might end up having tenants that, well, especially foreign students that are back home and they can't come back. Obviously, with regard to education, they might just void the tenancies before planning to move in on the 1st of July. And the problem you've got with a lot of student landlords, you might end up having a lot of voids. So then what you've got to do is you've got to have a B plan. What is my B plan? Can I look at possibly changing that accommodation and look for other types of tenant fields that can actually look to move in? I mean, my prediction is that I think a lot of landlords will look at the social housing tenants. The LHA rates have gone up another 13%, so they're a bit more attractive in a lot more areas. Obviously, London and South East, obviously rents are much higher. But I think landlords have got to really worry about voids, and they've got to think, you know what, I'd rather have a tenant and a tenancy and some sort of stability and peace of mind that I've got my tenant in, albeit I'm not getting the rent I was. But I do see a big rise, and I spoke to Barnet Council, the head of lettings, last week. I see a lot of, because statistically, Polly, a housing benefit tenant will stay in a property longer and look after it better. And of course, we have a housing crisis, and the councils are crying out to landlords for them to offer up their properties. I mean, obviously, the big worry that one has is, and I've never been a big fan of it, is universal credit and direct payments, and you get a lot of tenants that won't pass the rent on, and that's what has detracted landlords from going into that market. But I think that you'll get a lot of landlords going to councils and do 3-year deals where actually the tenant is the council, because they want that stability and guarantee. Because of course, when we have turbulence in a market and uncertainty, the most important thing a landlord wants is a tenant that can afford to pay the rent. And actually, they may resort to going to the council just to get that stability and security, you know. So I think that you'll see a lot of those thinking.
Just be a bit more agile in your thinking, be a bit, possibly don't be so, you may have a format that has worked for you brilliantly in the past, but all bets are off really. It's just a case of back to the drawing board and really looking at the options available to you now, as it were.
Most definitely. You've got to be versatile. You know, you've got your property, buy to let is long term, it's a strategy. You know, there's 5 things that keep a landlord awake at night, Polly. There's obviously rent not being paid, and obviously that has been a massive problem. And like I said, that's why the brand of property redress scheme, we've set this mediation business up, because obviously the courts are all suspended and landlords got nowhere to go, and you get tenants that bury their head in the sand and won't have those conversations. You've got obviously void periods where properties are empty and landlords losing money because they're not getting an income. There's obviously there's the maintenance of repairs, of obviously having to fund those. You've got Section 24, the tax legislation changes that came in, which I think that the government should look at that, because obviously landlords are taking a pounding and they need some sort of support. And then, of course, you've got more government regulation more than ever. You know, something like 170 rules and regulation in renting your property out now. And I can tell you now, from being in this game for many, many years, and I am a landlord, it's harder now being a landlord with regard to management than ever before. You have to make sure that you come to websites like Howay or Landlord Zone, or even, I always recommend become a member of the NRLA, National Residential Landlord Association, because that offers great value at £75 a year to keep up to speed with what's going on. Because it's not easy being a landlord. You have to make sure you're resigned and you've got that time to be able to fully manage. So there's more hurdles now than it ever has been for landlords, but it does pay because there is demand. There will always be demand even after COVID-19 and we come out of this, because people need to sleep somewhere.
We're certainly finding more and more people are coming to Howay as a management agent who previously have self-managed, but as it's getting more and more complex to do so, they're coming to us as a management agent and saying, look, we need help. We've always done it ourselves, but it's becoming very difficult to do so. Can you take over, basically? Is it something you can help us with? And that's
I mean, we get those calls all the time, Polly. Obviously, yeah, most definitely, we get all those calls all the time, and that's why, within 18 months, 2 years, all letting agents will be regulated. There was ROPA, which is basically regulating all agents. That's coming in. That's why we do educational programs with CPD points for letting agent, HF Academy, and we've actually got HF Assist, which is a letting agent advice line, because they get stuck, and actually, managing a property, if a landlord goes to a managing agent, the managing agent should give them the peace of mind and take all the aggravation and, grief away from the landlord. So I'm not surprised you're getting managing agents coming to you.
It's, and that brings us kind of neatly on to the next point, really. One of the things that we do a lot is sort of smoothing the tenant relationship between landlord and tenant. Obviously, as a managing agent ourselves, we obviously sort of almost the middleman, as it were, between landlord and tenant. If you don't have, and obviously we're an online agency, so it's almost business as usual for us because we've got the online platforms in place. So all our teams are working from home, but that's been quite a smooth transition, really. However, if you're a self-managed landlord, keeping that tenant relationship going during this time when you've been used to possibly face-to-face meetings and things must be quite tricky right at this moment in time. Have you got any kind of hints and tips for people who are finding that difficult?
Yeah, I mean, I've got loads. I mean, basically, you've got to realise, as a landlord, your tenant is your customer, right? No tenant, no landlord, no letting agent, okay? The money, the income you get in is from your tenant. So, and actually, what do you want your tenant to be? You want your tenant to be a happy tenant. A happy tenant means that hopefully your tenant will stay in your property longer. I mean, the average term of a tenancy is 4 years and 3 months, believe it or not. Okay, and actually, statistically, if you go through a managing agent, a bit like yourself, what happens is a tenant stays in the property longer. So, if as a landlord, if you are managing your property yourself, and you could be living quite a way away from the property, albeit technically you shouldn't be visiting the property anyway because it's not an essential trip, you have to have that engagement. So that's where your technology comes in, the phone. There is a saying, Polly, no news is good news for a landlord. I've been using it for years. If you don't hear from your tenant, as long as they're paying the rent, you're happy. But I think it's important to understand and making sure that your tenants are okay, making sure that also you have good relationships, believe it or not, with the neighbours of the property.
Absolutely.
I always recommend that when I do my talks, if you're self-managed landlords, because they can also keep an eye on the property, obviously if tenants abscond or leave or whatever. But you know what? It's about the line of communication. Every landlord, every tenant is different. They have different working relationships. A lot of landlords don't want to have any contact with their tenants, thus that's why they use a managing agent. Okay, make sure everything's documented, obviously with regard to WhatsApp and everything, you know, maybe having a Skype call or a call online just to make sure you're checking up on their welfare. It means a lot to a tenant, most definitely, because, you know, this COVID-19, I mean, you know, the invisible killer. I mean, I personally know 6 people through work and friends that have had relatives and friends that have died. You know, it is absolutely crazy. It's affected everyone. I do a lot of at weekends. I do a lot of voluntary work with my sister. Set up a support group, and we deliver food to the NHS and stuff. And I promise you, I was at Watford. I mean, I know I'm down a bit off piece now, but just with regard to the situation we're in, because it is crazy. I mean, I was in a car park at Watford General for about 20 minutes, and I saw 3 ambulances coming in that time. You know, it's just unbelievable what's happening. So, you know, check up on your tenants' welfare. You know, some landlords are scared about speaking to their tenants because they think the tenants are going to turn around and say, I can't afford to pay the rent. I have had that happen as well, and we will touch on that further down the line. But work together, make sure that your tenant can see that you care, because actually how you treat your tenant through this crisis, and people judge people for a time of crisis, you know, Absolutely. It's very important. You could actually build a stronger relationship with your tenant, which means hopefully they're staying in your property longer. You want a tenant staying in your property as long as possible. You know, that is the key, and that's the name of the game. If you are a landlord and you are looking to do this professionally, you know, always think professional. You know, even if you've got one property and you're renting it long term, you've got no plans to do anything with the property, treat it as a long-term strategy. Actually, one thing just on peace, Polly, which I would like to mention, and hopefully your listening landlords will engage on this. On Landlord Zone, I started a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to highlight the good things landlords are doing for their tenants during this crisis. So we have a feature called Landlord Hero of the Week, and we highlight and we write up their stories about what they've been doing. So if any landlords, and hopefully you're not embarrassed or not shy, if you're doing something good, I want to know about it at Landlord Zone. So maybe you could email me at landlordhero@landlordzone.co.uk. So every Friday we launch Landlord of the Week, and then we're going to plan to give a prize at the end of the year of Landlord of the Year, because we need to celebrate the good things landlords are doing.
And I think one of the biggest elements that's causing strain both for landlords and tenants is the financial pressures that everybody, regardless of situation, is facing at the moment. And we're hearing from every news outlet and here at Howay, and I'm sure you are as well, about the concerns of the financial impacts that landlords are going to be facing. What's the kind of the bigger picture on that? I mean, there's obviously rent payment holidays being spoken about, mortgage holidays. Are there any further financial assistance packages that landlords can go for, or what's the sort of the bigger picture with it?
Well, the bigger picture isn't with it. I mean, look, the financial impact. So, you know, if your tenant obviously stops paying the rent, let's be clear that the word holiday is being changed. It's a deferment. And I think the government are changing that, and we know that because we've heard that. They've changed the word holiday because there has been tenant groups, the tenant union, they got a petition of over 100,000 tenants to say that they want 3 months free rent. When I wrote a story on this on Landlord Zone, we did a poll on Landlord Zone for landlord action, and actually since lock-in, 74% of landlords, and it is extremely high, have had calls from their tenants to say they're going to struggle to pay the rent. Okay, so where you're at, you know, have a lot of landlords don't even have mortgages. Okay, I did a webinar last night with a mortgage lender actually, and they said that if your tenant has been affected by COVID-19, and I believe that if anyone's been affected by COVID-19, which is totally unprecedented what's happened, they should not be evicted. And that's where the engagement and the mediation comes in. And we will talk about the court issues and the time span. So that's why mediation is the way forward. You can, if you can prove your tenant's financial circumstances. As I said before, a good tenant doesn't turn into a bad tenant overnight. Their circumstances change. Everyone falls in hard times. If obviously your tenant has had to is applying for universal credit, or they've been furloughed, and bearing in mind, Polly, you're also going to have landlords that are going to be in that situation as well. They're going to be working. You know, majority of landlords have jobs, okay, themselves. They're not full-time landlords, and their situation. So this is about, a lot of the time, it's about fighting fires, you know, and it's about keeping your head above water. And you know, we also did another survey that, you know, a quarter of, I think it was a third of landlords could wait 3 months without having to take any court action if they didn't receive any payment. So it's what, you know, what is your B plan? Do you have a cash reserve? You know, if a tenant is coming to you and there is an issue, then obviously you should be looking at trying to do some sort of deferred payment. Make sure it's in writing. If you can get some documentation that the tenant has applied for government assistance or they have been furloughed, get a copy of their salary payslip, and then with that, you can go to your lender and say, look, this is my situation. I would like a deferment. It's a deferment. You still have to pay your mortgage. The tenants still have to pay the rent, albeit, you know, they pay it back at a later time, or your 3 months deferment with your mortgage holiday will actually end up being added to the security. But I don't think it won't affect your credit rating by all accounts. There has been a bit of a grey area about that, because you will get landlords that will all try and remortgage, and they go by the last 12 months payments on their mortgage. So getting proof is really important, trying to work with them. And if you are stuck and you can't get engagement from the tenant, which is an issue because you get a lot of tenants that bury their head in the sand as well, Polly, is the new service that we've got is tenancy mediation .theprs.co.uk. So it's tenancy mediation.theprs.co.uk. If you go on that website, that is the mediation service, and that's if you can't do a deal with your tenant, they're not engaging with you. We have mediators, so it's impartial, and there's more chance a tenant might open up with us, because it's better to get something rather than not. That is my advice during these lock-in and during these tough times in the next couple of months.
One of the questions that I've seen cropping up in a few places, mainly on sort of Facebook pages and whatnot, people are asking if, I know I've seen a couple of people have suggested that they can, rather than stopping rent, or if people have been furloughed, I think this is generally, they can make an adjustment to the rent and drop it down by a percentage to sort of correspond with the amount of money that people are losing on their monthly income, as it were. And if you were to do this, if you were to sort of half the rent for a period, and obviously document it in writing and make it very formalized that way, would that have any impact on the rental amount going forward? Or do you have to date it? Do you have to say this is for X amount of time, or how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, there is, on Landlord Action, we do sell payment plan agreements as well on our Landlord Action, if you go on the Landlord Action website. So the payment plans is basically, Polly, you're my tenant, unfortunately you've been furloughed, your income's come down, you're only getting 80% of your 100% wage, you know, you can't afford your £1,300 a month for rent. We've agreed between us for the next 3 months you're going to pay £800 for these dates in writing. On this date, this date, this date, you'll pay £800, and that the balance will be paid over blah 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 time. Putting that in writing, because that documentation is important. One thing I really got to mention to you, we haven't got a slide of this, and which is coming in, and I'll touch on other stuff that I'm working. I do a lot of consultation with the government, but what is definitely going to come in, and on the back of this, is pre-action protocol. So what will happen is, if your tenant stops paying the rent, and it gets to the point where you have to take action, you will have to have pre-action protocol where you will have to engage with tenants, have to try and do prepay plans with them, have to basically put everything in writing. If they are vulnerable, you have to highlight that and try and give some assistance. If they have to apply for benefits, you have to be able to correspond with them and tell them what to do. This all needs to be put in writing, and I think this action plan, which is in place with social tenants when there are rent arrears, is going to happen for private sector tenants. And we are advising, Landlord Action is actually advising on pre-action protocol with MHDCLD at the moment, because they are going to bring that in. What's going to happen is further down the line, with regard to rent arrears and court cases, mediation is going to prove heavily into this, because they want to. I mean, if you think at the back end of what's going to happen after this crisis, and we've got 600 cases at landlord action that are on hold at the moment. Okay, the courts are going to get absolutely swamped at the end of the year. They want to bring in mediation to stop loads of cases going to court.
It's I think there's going to be a long period of time where it's just sorting out the issues that have arisen, and obviously, of course, issues will continue to rise during that time. So there's going to have to be a serious change in the system, isn't there? Which obviously it sounds like there's going to be to deal with the problems that are happening. One of the other questions that we've had regularly come in is what's the deal with rent arrears insurance during this time? Appreciate that you can't buy it now and then hope for it to work.
Yes.
But if you've got rent arrears insurance, I mean, there's been a lot of stories in the press saying that business insurances are being null and void, and that. But how would rent arrears insurance work?
Right, good question, and it is very, very relevant, Polly. There is a lot of rental insurance, rent guarantee insurance providers that are not paying out because of COVID-19. A virus falls outside their terms of business. You know what it's like with insurance companies. It's all about T's and C's. They're not paying out, but also there is another issue. I mean, we do work for a rental insurance provider where we're doing a lot of, we do the eviction work and so forth. There's a majority of rental insurance providers I know, and Direct Line are one of them. They are not paying out on rental insurance. They might fund the eviction process. That's why mediation is really important. But also the terms is that they can't evict a tenant. So not only is the terms of COVID-19 falling outside the terms and conditions of a rent guarantee insurance policy, but also they are unable to evict a tenant within a reasonable time period because, of course, of the suspension. So there is a lot of disappointed landlords that thought that they were going to get their rent covered under this policy, and I think the legal fees will be covered, but the rent guarantee is not being covered. There are a couple of providers that are paying out, but that industry is totally in turbulence.
It's a tricky time for. I mean, we recommend that it's a good idea, generally speaking, to have rent guarantee insurance. It's a useful product to have, and obviously once this is over, whenever that might be, it is we at Howay, we always recommend that it is a useful tool in a landlord's arsenal, I think, to have a good guarantee.
But I think the policies might change.
But yeah, I think there's going to be significant changes in the insurance industry with regards to how they're managed. Insurances aside, I mean, one of the things that obviously does need careful attention, whatever the situation going on in the world, is to make sure that you're still fully compliant with all the relevant, as you mentioned, there's hundreds of pieces of legislation that landlords have to comply with. And lettings legislation is plentiful and complex at the best of times, but even more so at the moment when obviously you're not able to kind of go about your business as you normally would. So how are landlords supposed to comply with all the legislations that they need to when they can't access their properties and do the normal things that they would normally be doing?
Okay, so a good question. So look, let's talk on gas safety certificates, EPC, and licensing. Where you're at and what's happening. So at the moment, the government on the guidelines have turned around and said that landlords and agents can only attend at property for essential repairs and for essential checks. Gaspart, which is the Association of Gas Engineers, initially said that they don't want their gas engineers attending, but there are some gas engineers that are attending, obviously, for gas safety certificates. Obviously, the issues that one has had is obviously if a tenant does not want to give you access, which is going to be very common because I don't want anyone in their house, or a tenant could be self-isolating. So I know of gas engineers that have set up apps where they prove that they've tried to engage and tried to do an appointment. If you're trying to get an engineer to do your gas safety, make sure everything's documented. Even if they've turned up at the property, they can take a picture. Obviously, the tenant is refusing access. There's no more that you can do as a landlord. I think with regards to enforcement, it's not going to be such an issue. Obviously, you know, and what I suppose we'll touch on this, but, you know, when you obviously have a tenant moving in, then there's not going to be a lot of move-in deals happening, obviously, during lockdown. And we hope, you know, bearing in mind in this lockdown where we're at now, there might be another 3 weeks that might start obviously for the first week of May, and then touch wood, that will be it, and then easing of restrictions thereafter. But obviously you have to serve a gas safety certificate, an EPC, and a how to rent guide prior to the tenant moving in. Very, very important. We haven't heard any change of legislation with regard to that, with regard to serving Section 21. I will talk about Section 21 when I come on to evictions and what's going to happen, because I've been sitting on government consultations about that banning of Section 21 and what's going to happen. That will be sped up. So be conscious that if you haven't done your gas safety certificate, prove that you've tried to make attempts with your gas engineers. Obviously, with regard to EPCs, obviously if they've run out, they have to, when do they have to be redone? EPCs can lapse, but obviously you would not do EPC until you start remarketing the property. You know, if you've got a property that's empty, well, then that's easy, because of course you can go ahead, do the necessary things. Obviously trying to get suppliers and engineers in. Obviously some will be working, some won't be working. You know, obviously with regard to move-ins, there's no removal companies that can help tenants. They might have to do it themselves. And obviously with regard to licensing, which is obviously a subject that causes a lot of emotion and a lot of reactions from landlords. You know, they are still enforceable. Obviously, you've got obviously a lot of enforcement, environmental health officers that are working remotely. You still need to do your applications. I personally think I mean, I understand how selective licensing works, because I did a day in a life of shadowing an environmental health officer, which you can read on Landlord Zone under LZ Voice. I shadowed Howay Council. Dealing with the applications, you still need to put your applications in, unfortunately. Personally, I would like to see licensing scrapped, and I think that there should be property MOTs that come in. I think tenant passporting will happen further down the line. I think they will be linked, but I think if you did a survey of most landlords, they would like to get rid of landlord licensing because they think it's unfair.
I think there's going to be so many changes. It's going to be difficult to know really yet what what we're looking at, isn't it? But ultimately with the legal, making sure you're meeting your legal requirements. If you do as much as you can, you may come up against barriers, whether it be your tenants, whether it be finding appropriate people to carry out the checks. Maybe it's the councils are not processing licensing, but if you can prove through documentation that you are doing all you can, then you should be you should be okay.
You should be fine, but it could definitely.
So, I mean, things like your gas safety checks can obviously be planned for to a certain extent, because you know they're coming up. You've got a time frame in place. But obviously, as any landlord will know, there's emergency maintenance hiccups that happen along the way, and you can't plan for a leaking pipe or a broken boiler.
Yes.
So, managing maintenance under the current regulations. What are you able to do? What maintenance are you allowed to carry out? What's classed as essential maintenance in these strange times?
Yeah, so urgent repairs need to be carried out still. So a tenant should, if the tenant is not living in a safe property and has reported a repair. So let's just talk in roof leaking, problems with the boiler, no hot water, plumbing issues, tenant doesn't have a washing facility, washing up, toilet facilities, and obviously problems with white goods or broken fridges or washing machines not working, security issues such as broken windows, external doors, also, you know, equipment for a disabled person, possibly a disabled tenant in your property. They all need to be carried out. You know, of course, you have to. There's still maintenance guys working. They're self-employed. You know, they are still working, and obviously they have to work with obviously the safe distancing rules in place. So that's what needs to be carried out. If you ignore it, the tenant will complain to the council. As to how quickly the council reply and deal with that issue is another answer. I couldn't tell you that. But obviously what happens is, pardon me, if the council come round and you haven't complied or have done any work, they will give you a chance to carry out the work within a certain time period. If you do not do that, which is normally 14 days, if you do not do that, they could serve an improvement notice or a hazard notice on you, which means that you wouldn't be able to serve a section 21 further down the line. So it's important that you make sure that you have dealt with those issues. Have the mindset that actually you want your tenant to treat your property as their home. You know, would you want to live in that property under those circumstances? Okay, the answer is no. So that's what you need to carry out. Make sure everything's documented. Make sure that the tenant confirms that the repairs are carried out and they are happy and they've consented and there are no issues outstanding. Very important.
And a lot of people are, as we mentioned earlier, a lot of people are now using management agents, but some agents who possibly aren't necessarily sort of transitioning to digital quite as fully. I said Howay, obviously we're digital anyway, so we're carrying on as normal. But I know there's a lot of high street agents who haven't transitioned quite as fully. If your management agent isn't operating fully, does the responsibility to manage maintenance then fall to you, or because it sits with them, is it still their problem even if they're not possibly operating as they normally would?
Polly, a managing agent, whether their office is open or whether they are working from home in their bedroom, still has a duty of care to act for the landlord. You're paying a management fee, so that doesn't stop just because of what's going on. Yes, they can't go around to the property, they can't be as hands-on, but they do have access to maintenance guys. If they're struggling, well, you get your own maintenance guys. Find someone that is working. You know, you'll know landlords in the local area that can recommend people to you. It's not an excuse. You are still liable as the landlord. You are the owner of the property. You have to carry out the work. If you went to the council, if the tenant complained to the council, you know, and said the work was not carried out, and you turn around and said, well, our managing agent didn't do that. And let's be honest, you know, we own the property redress scheme. We have 13,000 letting agents that are members of our scheme, and we deal with issues of complaints on letting agents. A lot of it is with regard to service and lack of communication. You are liable for the property. Yeah. If your managing agent is not doing what they should be doing, then look at that relationship closely.
I mean, we've the use of sort of things like video technology, like Skype, FaceTime. Could they be used for sort of midterm inspections and things? Because as this process continues and looks like it's going to be possibly a longer term than first thought, things like midterm inspections to ensure that maintenance issues possibly don't crop up are really quite important. Yeah. So could you connect with your tenants and say, can we catch up on a FaceTime call around the property?
Yeah. I think, yeah, you know what, yes, you can do that. The problem you've got is you're relying on the tenant to go round with a FaceTime to look at the property, but at least it's some sort of evidence. The thing is, obviously, it needs to be recorded. You need to have a follow-up with something in writing to say, yes, I'm happy with the property, let me have a look. You know, there are agents still going out there doing midterm inspections, but obviously making I mean, technically they shouldn't because it's not essential. Even an inventory is not deemed as essential. Move-ins, if you're contractually liable, can still go ahead and they're not enforceable by the police, but the safe distancing rules have to be carried out. You know, you are getting agents that will go to a property if the tenant's not there or they are allowed access and it's empty. They are still doing that because they're still trying to market. They're still got to pay the bills. You know, there has to be a lot of common sense that's in place. I mean, the strict provisions are what I've just told you from the government guidance. But landlords, especially a lot of self-landlords, are doing stuff which technically don't contravene with the government guidance because it may not be deemed as mandatory. But you know what? Technology now is more important than ever. One thing we haven't touched on, which is important, the right. I don't know if you can hear, so that's my dog in the background, so I apologise. Is the right to rent checks. Now they can be done obviously on digital, so you can see the right to rent and you can see the visa status by Skype and and Zoom. You don't need to see it personally, obviously. So the government made an amendment with regard to that.
There's a huge amount of things changing, isn't there? And it's amazing to see how quickly it's all, well, it's having to be, obviously, and how quickly it's all happening. And I mean, one of the biggest changes we've seen is the way evictions are obviously managed or not.
Yeah.
As the head of Landlord Action, you must be getting huge amounts of questions about these changes. What's on? Can you talk us through kind of what's happening? What's the state of play with the eviction process at the moment?
Yeah. So I'll update everyone. So at Landlord Action, we have something like 600 cases that are on hold at court. So the government made a provision on the 26th of March to say that any notice served after that date is a 3-month length period. So we're talking Section 8, Section 21 now are 3 months. So Section 21, which was a 6A, was 2 months. Section 8 was 14 days. It's 3-month period, any notice has been served. So bear in mind, you've got to wait 3 months before you can issue proceedings. All proceedings have been suspended on current cases. So we're talking about cases that we've got to court, Section 8 and Section 21, which were pre-COVID-19 cases, so not affected by tenants with COVID-19. And they are all on hold until the 25th of June, which is going to be reviewed. It's a nightmare for landlords, okay? So, we're getting cases that have been adjourned. We had cases on the week or the announcement came out. I had a case which was going to be featured on Nightmare Tenant Slum Landlords. I got something like 12, 13 stories on the new series coming out in June. And we had a case of a lady who was owed £22,000 rent arrears on the week of the eviction. 2 days before the eviction, the COVID-19 bill came out and her eviction was put on hold. So, you're getting landlords that because of this COVID-19 suspension, that had current cases are really being affected. So, as I said, the reality now, you as a landlord, if you've got tenants in arrears, and there'll be a lot of landlords that listen to that do have tenants in arrears, is about the engagement piece you've got to do, is maybe use and look at our mediation service, which I talked about, or, a last resort serving a notice, but you've got to wait 3 months, so that could be another 3 months rent arrears. Let me just add two things.
What would be the situation if you had a tenant who was, obviously rent arrears is a big part of why you would issue notice, but what if you had a tenant who was displaying really antisocial behaviour that was having a real impact on possibly other tenants or neighbours or the neighbourhood generally? Because obviously that would be another reason for an eviction notice. What would you do in that situation? Because when it's having an impact on the wider community, possibly other tenants, where do you go with that? Because surely you can't be running riot for 3 months without being.
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. I mean, look, one can actually call the police if there's antisocial behaviour or breach of, obviously a breach of behaviour as well. You can obviously call the police naturally. It's a big issue in HMOs because you end up having the other tenants that are put under pressure and they're intimidated. That's why Section 21 is quite good for that, because you use a Section 8 ground. Just touching on that, at the moment all you can do is serve a notice, and that kicks into 3 months. So it is a killer for landlords. I mean, let me just touch on the points that I was going to say. Was Section 21 is going to be banned. It's finished. Be very clear about that. I know that because I sit on panels. I sat on a panel with the landlord associations called the Fair Possession Coalition, and we were trying to map out how Section 8 is going to look. So if you want to sell your property, you want to move in, they're going to be extra added grounds for Section 8. We had the housing court consultation. We had the civil servants and our office of landlord action, where we were advising the government. The issue that you have with Section 21, there is unintended consequences. If you don't have major investment in the court system, you do need to use mediation, but a lot of landlords use Section 21, Polly, at the moment, not just for rent arrears, but also for antisocial behaviour, because of course you have tenants, other tenants in the property or neighbours that are too intimidated to give witness statements and evidence, and it's a discretionary ground. So we worry about that. We worry about that landlords will be much more stringent on referencing, and actually another unintended consequence, and there will be a rise in homelessness. There's no two ways about that, because what happens is also you have a lot of tenants that encourage landlords to serve Section 21 because they're told by their council they can be rehoused because they're not intentionally obviously being they're not intentionally leaving the property themselves. They are being forced to leave so they can be rehoused. A lot of landlords will use Section 21 even though they could have used Section 8 for rent arrears, write off the rent arrears, but when you get a possession order on a Section 20 where it does not show the money order, so they go to the council rehouse them. If you switch and get rid of all those Section 21 accelerated cases where last year there was 21,000, they get switched to Section 8. So you're going to have something like 43,000 Section 8 cases next year. Well, this year 2020 is going to rise obviously because of COVID virus. You need more landlord, you need more judges to do the cases. But what happens is if you go on a Section 8 case with a money order, you go to the council will say, hold on a second, you've made yourself be evicted, you haven't paid the rent, we can't house you. And there's going to be a rise in homelessness, and the government didn't understand that when I explained that to them. So there's big issues, and I do worry, really worry. I think Section 21 banning is going to come in quicker, right? I thought it was going to be phased in because of this crisis. How landlords react to that, because Section 21 is a very important tool. And the reality is, Polly, because of COVID-19 and obviously financial strains, and yes, you've had Section 24 and you've had loads of legislation changes, and now the banning of Section 21, I think you will see landlords exit the marketplace. There's no two ways about that. But I mean, obviously, we'll talk about my feelings on how the market's going to go. I think, obviously, if you are a landlord, you still want to build a portfolio up, there will be opportunities, you know.
We're talking about landlords exiting the market. We here at Housing, we obviously, the government advises that property moves shouldn't go ahead unless completely unavoidable. That's clear, yeah. And that's understandable. But we're finding that the appetite for tenants looking at properties hasn't. Obviously, it's slowed because they're aware that they're not able to move. But there's still tenants out there that are still searching for their perfect property. We're still getting a lot of interest coming in. We're still getting a lot of people making inquiries about properties. So what would the situation be for landlords who are looking to market their property during this time? I mean, we're offering a 3-month free marketing period. And obviously you don't pay until someone's in your property. So you're ultimately, if you was to market the house at the moment, it's free marketing at the moment, and there's plenty of people sat at home looking for their properties. If you're anything like me, you're sick of the 4 walls that you're sat in at the moment, so looking to move is positive. However, there are obviously issues around that, because obviously photography, floor plans, that sort of thing, unless the property is vacant, presumably they can't be undertaken. It's a strange time.
You know what? Every property is different. Every market is different. The type of tenant you want. You need to identify the market you're going after. There is still, when we come out of this, the lockdown, means that there could be people that have left the property during this time. You're right. How can you get your marketing material to be able to market the property? I think, the offer that Housing have got of the 3-month free marketing offer is a complete no-brainer to use for a landlord, for an assistant. It's an added tool. You will get, demand is still strong. I think landlords need to be reasonable with regard to rents that they're asking. If they were asking $250 a week and they're marketing it, and they might have got a couple of applicants, but you can put it down to $220 a week, and you'll get 10 applicants, then you can choose the best tenant for you. There will be still people looking, so I think rather than leave an empty property, yes, by all means try and market it, and use the assistance of agents like yourself to help with that marketing material. If the property is empty, well, then you can go to the property and, maybe you can get some pictures, because obviously that property is safe, because obviously there was no one in there, you're going to make sure that if you did have a tenant in the property, there still needs to be that clean. And they, believe it or not, they said that anyone that was self-isolating, they've left the property, they reckon that there's a 72-hour window to wait until there's a relet or a move-in. So I think landlords are going to try and carry on their normal business, keep on calm, and keep on trying to let.
And I'm gonna put you on the spot, Paul. We've talked about.
I love that.
Good. We've talked about. I mean, I know it's impossible to look into the future and see what the market's gonna look like. But do you have any gut feelings about where we're going to be in 3 months, 6 months, a year, what the market's going to look like? And obviously you've mentioned throughout this webinar sort of a few things that you know are coming up and how they could be changing given the current situation. Yeah. But what are your predictions for the market moving forward, given the situation we're in at the moment?
Okay, right. This is my view. I think we're not going to. No, I don't mind. I like being put on the spot. I think you're not going to get a true reaction with regard to the market until the summer. You know, I don't think people understand the impact. I mean, you know, I've been working, dealing with debt, dealing with issues, collecting money. I used to be a bailiff, a private investigator, obviously working with solicitors, doing mortgage repossession. You know, we have historically low interest rates. People forget that. You know, landlords have been borrowing cheap money for 10, 12 years, and now it's, you know, it's rock bottom. Yes, mortgage products have been pulled for 50% of the products out there. There will be the change of loan to value. That would definitely change. You know, rather than, you know, there was products of 90%, you won't be able to get them in there, but that was squeezed down with regards to loan to value. I think until the summer, we get a better picture. I think rents will come down. I think landlords need to be reasonable. You need to see your competition. You need to basically find and pick good tenants. Landlords, the way they reference will change. They will want some sort of security. I think my prediction is, you know, don't forget the market has always been very strong, you know, but there's going to be a rise in unemployment, Polly, without two ways about that. You know, the government have thrown absolute fortunes with regard to bailouts, and so obviously, you know, debt-wise, that's all going to be paid back. How's that going to happen? I think the housing market will come down, possibly about 10%, 15%. You will see small landlords exit the market. I think that will happen. They were doing that anyway. I think that you will see an increase in homelessness. I think there will be a greater impact and pressure on the government to invest massively into social housing. I think that will come to the fore because that's been neglected by years and years. I mean, the social housing sector runs about 16%. You know, we're about 20% for the private rental sector. It's been a bit of a sticking plaster for the social housing sector. I think you'll see landlords looking at renting more to housing benefit tenants and doing deals with councils. You'll see the Airbnb market, which has been desecrated, and short let market, that's been brought down to 90%. You'll see those landlords come back into the private rental sector market. You know, you've got to see how many industries are going to be affected by COVID-19 across the world. So, you know, you've got tourism, aviation, retail, catering, hospitality. I mean, it's endless. Supply chains, manufacturing. I think, you know, we're in for a long road, but I think the lettings market will still stand up. The demand is still going to be there. I think landlords have got to be realistic. And they've got to think about protecting their, you know, rents have risen significantly over the last 10, 15 years, year on year, give or take. I think that landlords need to be realistic, and I think the case is making sure you're having that really good tenant in the property with the intention they're going to stay as long as possible, and be realistic with rent. I mean, I would also, when you've got tenants in a property, and I've had this, I've got a tenant in Spain. I haven't put the rent up to this tenant in Spain for 4 years. I think landlords got to think, you know what, I've got a really good tenant here. I need to make sure I keep this tenant. I'm not going to put the rent up this year. Think about that. You know, you've got to think the long-term strategy about where the market's going. But as I said, the commercial market, I think it's going to get hit really, really big, Polly, where you'll get a lot of commercial leases and tenants just vacating up sticks. I think there'll be a rise in squatting in commercial properties. And I think also, if you look at the rent-to-rent market and the guaranteed rent market, I think that's going to be desecrated as well. So I know I sound a little bit doom and gloomish, but I tell it how it is, Polly. I've had years of experience of working in recessions, and this is unprecedented.
It's going to be a complete change to our landscape, isn't it? And what we know is normal. We've had some questions in. When people registered for this webinar, they were able to ask some questions. So I've got some questions to fire at you, Paul, if that's okay.
Please do.
So I've got a question here from Scott. My tenant has moved out of the property to lock down with their family, and the property is now sitting empty. This has invalidated my insurance. What should I do?
Good question. So there's two aspects to this. There's one, he needs to, I'm going to state the offer, speak to his mortgage provider with regard to this situation, get some clarification with regard to the cover, because the property's empty, it can't be empty for so many days. There's normally T's and C's in there. I think that's important. I think also there's got to be communication with the tenant that the tenant still knows they're liable for the terms of the tenancy. Just because they move away, I mean, we are seeing a real rise, Polly, of tenants just giving keys back and think they can walk away from tenancies. And a lot of them are walking away from tenancies, but they're still liable until the end of the term, until you re-let the property. And yes, you have a deposit, and as you know, we get a lot of these questions on our My Deposits advice line with the customer service team with regard to early move-outs. Getting clarification when the tenant's going to move in roughly, well, he's not going to be able to answer that question because of this lock-in and the guidance and stuff. So you're going to get a lot of those landlords having tenants in that situation. But I think you do need to get some sort of clarification from the insurance company. If it is any consolation, I think burglaries and vandalism and theft have come right down in statistics because obviously people are at home. So there's been a huge rise. There's been a huge rise in obviously domestics and mental health, which is really worrying in these times.
I suppose, as you mentioned earlier as well, getting in touch with the neighbours as well might be quite useful in this situation, because especially if you're distant from the property, because they're kind of your eyes and ears, aren't they? Really, in your absence, they can kind of keep an eye on things from over the garden fence almost, just to make sure that no harm is kind of coming to the property. I've got another one here from Anne-Marie. I usually have a cleaner who visits my HMO regularly to clean the common areas. The cleaner's been furloughed, presumably by a company, and are now unavailable. Is it my responsibility to carry on providing this service, and is it safe to do so?
Very good question. So if it's in the terms of the tenancy that you clean common parts, which normally it is for HMO landlords, well, you need to have you need to look at the provision. You can either have a conversation with your tenants and say, look, you know, the cleaner can't come, you know, for these next few weeks. Is there an opportunity that you can obviously try and clean it yourselves? I mean, obviously you've got a reasonable relationship with your tenants, and most tenants are decent people. They might come to some sort of arrangement with you that makes sense. Or it may be that, and it's not ideal, you know, that you find another way of remedy or dealing with that issue. You know, I have heard of a story of landlords going themselves and doing the cleaning just to keep the tenants sweet, but making sure that they're not going near those tenants, and obviously they're just sticking to the common parts while the other tenants stay in their rooms is another issue. You know, I think it's important, and this is where the lines of communication happen.
I suppose there's a possibility that tenants might not even want another person coming into the property. It's whilst you kind of want to keep it, you obviously want your property clean, but there is the thought that the fewer people kind of in an environment, the better at the moment, really.
Most definitely.
I make this the final question. If my tenant has been unable to pay rent during this time, would I be able to evict them at the end of the process, or will they be protected? And that's from Mark.
No, so Mark, basically try the mediation route to see if you can get some sort of payment on a payment plan, which I told you about our mediation service, or you trying to do some sort of deal with your tenant. A lot of tenants are really transparent and they want to sustain the tenancy, so they should be honest with you. And I give advice to tenants as well to say, make sure you always communicate with your landlord. If it goes to the point of no return, it's quite clear the tenant can't afford to live in the property, because it comes to a point where a landlord financially can't hold it off any longer. Then you'd have to serve a Section 8 notice, which is 3 months. Once the 3 months expires, hopefully the courts would have reopened up, and then we would issue a possession. Then you'd issue a possession claim at court. Then obviously we are a little bit in the unknown, because we don't know how quickly we can get a hearing date, or how quickly bogged down the courts are. I'm telling landlords it can take you 6 to 9 months to evict your tenant. That's the time period you have to have in your head. So I'm saying, if you can think of any remedy in the issue in the meantime to try and avoid it. I've actually been getting quite a bit of criticism, Polly, by actually saying that. I mean, bearing in mind I've been doing this all my working life. I'm saying this is where you have to work with a tenant. This is totally unprecedented, you know, and no tenant should be evicted because their circumstances have changed with COVID-19. You know, I'm getting some landlords that are completely ruthless, and you know, I know one landlord where a tenant came to me and said, you know, I've offered to pay them £800 a month, I rent £1,200 a month, and they said they want all the money. Well, actually, landlord, a tenant can pay you whatever they want. You can't do anything about it in this time. You know, legally it's 9 months. So actually, the strength and the shoe is on the other foot with regard to time span. Bearing in mind, we were worried about housing courts and the time periods beforehand. That's why I worried about the banning of Section 21 and what the repercussions and the unintended circumstances could be. So, yes, you can get the tenant out, but it's going to be timely, is the answer to that question.
Okay, perfect. Obviously, if you've got any further questions, you can email them to me on the email address that's shown on your screen now, and we'll do our very best to answer them. And I'll put all the answers of the questions up on the blog post on Howay, Urban and UPAD. The addresses will follow, and you'll be able to read those questions and then watch the video back from the blog as well. So that brings us nearly to the end of the webinar. So if you want to hear some more from Paul, he's obviously got some great information. Your Nightmare Tenant Slum Landlords is going to be back on Channel 5 from June. Is it, Paul? Is that when your new series is?
Yeah, the new series, 6 series, is coming out in June. I'm actually filming tomorrow, ironically, the very last bit of filming, which is in a studio, just me and the cameraman, doing catch-up interviews on some of the stories. But yeah, it's coming out. I mean, they repeat it every day on Channel 5 or 5-star as well. It's been a big program with over 1 million viewers. But also, if anyone has issues with, like I said, with they want to do the mediation, I gave you the mediation address of tenancy-mediation.prs.co.uk. Or if you've got an issue with a tenant and you do need to take action, we are a regulated firm of solicitors, been doing this for 20 years. We do it for fixed fees. Make sure that it's done correctly. Then obviously landlordaction.co.uk. Or you can, if you want to follow what I'm up to and my engagement, I'm on LinkedIn and also at Paul Champlin or at Landlord Action. And lastly, Polly, obviously I wrote a book with Kate Faulkner, which is on Amazon, The Landlord's Friend. But if you want daily breaking news, especially in this pandemic, go onto our website, landlordzone.co.uk. There's a forum on there. We've got breaking news. There's blogs from various people in the industry. You've got to keep yourself up to date. It's really, really important.
Now's a perfect time to get up to date with all the historical things that have gone on and everything that's been changing in the world of the PRS. So it's a perfect opportunity to sort of read some of the articles and obviously get involved in the forums as well. So Landlord Zone is a great place to start, I would think. So thank you so much,
most
Paul.
definitely.
It's been absolutely brilliant. I can't thank you enough. I dare say that there's been so much information, so I dare say people might want to listen back, in which case you can find the webinar on the Howay blog, the UPAD blog and the Urban blog, as well as obviously the answers to all of the questions asked today. Paul, I don't know if you're going to be sharing the blog, the webinar anywhere as well, but I dare say
we'll push it out.
Wonderful. So it will be in plenty of places to find, and obviously you can then read back all the questions as well. So that's really it from us tonight. Obviously, if you've got any requirements for letting your property or any management requirements, you can contact us on the websites below or on the phone. All of our teams are available at home, and we're all working from home, business as usual at Howay, UPAD and Urban. So any further questions, please don't hesitate to give us a call. And once again, Paul, thank you so much for your time. Everybody,
Pleasure.
keep safe and